How's it going, everybody? This is the delightful Eon here, and today I'm going to be talking about what is the ideal form of government. And this has been a question I've been mulling over in my head for quite some time now. It's something that I've been increasingly interested in as I've seen various developments in governments around the world. Very big fan of Lee Kuan Yew from Singapore. Check him out. He's a very interesting leader with a very interesting backstory. But I thought I would talk a little bit about what my personal ideal system would be and sort of offer up a defense as to why this is the proper system. So here is how my system would work. I believe that the ideal system in the modern age is a mix between direct democracy and dictatorship. Now, many people are going to hear that and, think rightfully that those two things are antithetical. But I'm going to offer up a little bit of a twist on the framework as to how this would work to where I think it could be a more viable solution and it doesn't make it as antithetical as one might think. So let me lay out my proposal, and feel free to comment down below some of your thoughts. But make sure to watch the entire video. Try to, give me a chance to open up your heart to the idea before you shut me down immediately. So firstly, the leader would be in charge for 10 years. And the reason I think that there'd be a dictator who had basically total power, other than certain limitations, which I'm going to touch on, for 10 years. And the reason I think this 10-year limitation is necessary is because I don't think a lifelong dictator is a good idea, because then you're going to get someone who feels as though the system can only sustain itself through my continuation of power, and that's how you get long-term dictators. So I think there would be a change of power, but it would be done every decade. I think the idea that you change power every 4 years, it's too quick. You can never really tell the effects of policies in terms of their implementation, if they actually work or not. And that can generally lead to a disgruntled democracy over time, or a disgruntled democratic republic like we kind of have. So I think that would be my rationale for that. I think the dictator needs 10 years in order to actually have a measured effect of their policies and to actually be able to change things in society. So the dictator would be in charge for 10 years. Now, there would be certain limitations on the dictator. And this is an important part, because I know a lot of people are assuming, well, the dictator would just take over and, the dictator would enrich themselves. But there would be certain limitations that I believe would keep the dictator in check. And the dictator's not allowed to change these. These are the only real strictly enforced rules. So number one is there would be 3 elected accountants. And the accountants would and these would be directly elected by the people once a year. And those accountants would do an audit of the financials of the dictator. So they would look at the income streams and the assets of the dictator, and those results would automatically be sent to everyone's cellular device and automatically sent to public libraries for monthly reviewing. So every month you would get an audited financial statement, 3 of them, maybe an email, maybe it would be an app automatically installed on everyone's phone, could do either. But this would show what assets the dictator has and where his money or her money is invested. And I think this is really important because it offers financial transparency. It allows the people to see whether the dictator is self-enriching themselves, and I believe that's a very important principle in terms of maintaining a frugal and moral government. So that would be one restriction on the dictator. The second restriction on the dictator would be their income. Their income has to be 10% below the median salary in the country. I think this is really important because, once again, we want someone of sufficient moral character, and I believe that it's very hard to maintain sufficient moral character when basically every politician is sold to the highest bidder. I mean, people are naturally greedy, and they're going to, cave to those sort of impulses. Most people, not everybody, but most people are going to cave to those kind of lower impulses, to where if they're offered a lot of money, they're going to take it even at the expense of their principles. So this kind of limits that by saying, no, the dictator earns 10% less than the median salary in the country, and that would prevent them from basically being someone who's in it for the money. So they have their financials audited, automatically sent every month, and then they have their income capped 10% below the median salary. And it would automatically adjust year after year depending on the median in the country. So that'd be the second restriction that I would implement. The third restriction would be a monthly psychological evaluation. Once again, this would be sent to everyone's cellular device. I believe this is important because we are in an era of nuclear weapons. And ultimately, that's a very dangerous prospect long term. The idea that, you have one guy or one person who has the authority to use nuclear weapons seems like a step too far for any man to take. But I believe that a psychological evaluation would be very important. Once again, these are sent to everybody every month. Some people would say that's an invasion of privacy, but there has to be a cost with being dictator. Look, being dictator in my system is not a walk in the park. You have to be willing to sacrifice for it. You have to be willing to expose yourself to the arrows and the whippings of the public, and that's a necessary element here to keep balance. So that would be the third system, the third check. The third requirement for the dictator. So already I've built a more transparent system than our current system. I mean, the current system, you have no idea where your politician's money really is, how much assets they own, what their income is. In my system, you get a direct report every month. I mean, that's far more transparency. Also, it's far more moral in terms of the dictator being paid 10% below the median salary of the country. They're not self-enriching themselves. And they have psychological evaluations, so some nut job isn't going to get in charge of the nuclear weapons. So it's a more secure system in a way. But I'll move on to the fourth. Before I pat myself on the back too much, I'll move on to the fourth check mark, or the fourth rule, I would say. Another rule that would have to be followed would be that the dictator is not allowed to discriminate against anyone based on their race, religion, or sexual orientation. I think that's really important, because the problem with having a dictator is the dictator is naturally going to want to favor their own group. So I think you need that explicitly said, right? You need that explicitly written into the law, that they're not going to be favoring, well, I'm a black person, I'm going to favor all the blacks, or I'm Asian, or I'm white, or I'm whatever. I'm a Christian, I'm a Jew, whatever. And that prevents a lot of this nonsense where you see people favoring their own group. I think it's a very dangerous precedent, and I think it would lead to the deterioration of the system very quickly if it were to happen. So you need certain rules in place. So those would be my four main restrictions. Those are my four main concerns. Now, as far as the rules that how do we pass laws, you might be asking. Does the dictator just wave a magic wand? No, and this is where the direct democracy part comes in. So in terms of how democracy would work in this system, every single law or every single bill that's proposed has to be read aloud on public television and public radio every week. So basically 4 p.m. on Saturdays, everybody get around the TV or around the computer, because they're going to read off the bill. They are going to read a 20-page bill on public radio or public television. The bill has to be under 20 pages as well. What we're doing micro bills, essentially like, all right, we need a bill for this specific thing, and it's going to be less than 20 pages. And any bill over 20 pages is ultimately filled with a bunch of nonsense anyway. Page 700 of this Harry Potter book, there's going to be some benefits in there for some lobbyist that no one actually bothered to read the bill anyway. Like, keeping the bills under 20 pages keeps things concise, and it keeps it to where even the most commoner of citizens can understand. So that's a very important part. So we have the less than 20 pages, and it has to be read aloud on public radio and public television. Now, every bill that's proposed would be automatically sent to everyone's cellular device, or automatically sent to the library. And this would be a monthly event. So the bills would be read every week, but there'd be a monthly vote on the proposed bills currently. And people could read through all the bills. So it would pop up on your phone. You'd click on the bill, and you would scroll through it, 20 pages. And then at the end of the bill, you could either vote yes or no. After you vote, there would be a 10-question quiz that would basically weed out people who took the process seriously from people who didn't. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, that's not fair, it's discriminatory. But we're not talking about, like a very difficult test, like, well, what's on page 81? What's on page 18? It's not going to be something like that. It's going to be like, is this bill about immigration or is it about food quality? How much is going to be spent on this? How much is going to be spent on this bill? Very basic stuff that if someone doesn't have a basic grasp of, their opinion really is not relevant on the bill. It's really not. I'm sorry. If you can't answer a basic 10-question quiz at the end of a bill, then your opinion on this bill really is not relevant. It's kind of like a book report. If you didn't read the book, I'm sorry, your opinion really isn't valid. It's really that simple. And for those of you who are complaining about that, and I can understand some pushback on this, understand that my system's still giving you more say than the current system, right? You're getting a chance to vote every month, and you're voting directly on the bills that are read aloud on public radio and public television and sent automatically to your cellular device. So you're getting far more transparency and far more opportunity to voice your opinion than you are in the current system, regardless of whether you miss a couple of votes because you didn't bother to actually read the bill. So you're still getting far more participation. You're still getting far more opportunity to vote and impact how your country's ran than the current system where you have no say at all. You basically vote for a representative and then they go and maybe do kind of what you wanted them to do, although based on my research, there's no statistical evidence that the people you vote for has any correlation to the policies that are passed. So still, my system offers more transparency. It's more moral because the dictator isn't self-enriching themselves, and you're getting far more of a say in terms of the bills that are implemented. So you have that one filter that basically it's like, all right, everyone's going to vote every month on every bill that's proposed. All bills have to be under 20 pages, and every bill has to be read aloud on public radio and public television every week that when it's proposed, and then at the end of the month, you vote for all the bills that were proposed that month. And the reason this is an ideal system is because you're filtering out people who aren't taking the process seriously. You're maximizing the participation of the individual. Yes, some people are going to say, oh, I don't want to vote in a bill every month. Well, those people aren't going to take the process seriously anyway. Those people aren't interested in participating in this, in this type of government. Now, here is where the split comes, and here is where I could understand some pushback, but I really think this is important. The dictator would receive all of the data from, who voted for what and did this bill pass or not. And they would say, all right, 50% of people voted yes on this bill, 50% voted no, or 70% voted yes and 30% voted no. The dictator would make the ultimate decision. That is the burden of being a dictator, is that the dictator has to make the ultimate decision. And I think that the reason that direct democracy does not work in principle is because anytime you have a system where just merely the ability to draw breath constitutes the validity of your opinion, that system's going to deteriorate over time. It is. Like the idea that my opinion in the realm of how we allocate scientific capital would be the equivalent of Einstein's is ridiculous on its face. It's not a sustainable model. It's not something that is that is based in reality. It's a whimsical kind of idea. Well, everyone has a vote though, and everyone in my system does get a vote. They get to vote every month, but that doesn't mean that just because you vote that policy automatically passes. And that's the dictator's job, is to take in the dictator, the king, the queen, whatever you want to call them, the fact that they get to take into consideration the real world applications and the real world stability of what is being proposed. I believe that's a very, very important thing. So you can say, oh, well, we want to give everyone a free house. And the dictator is going to vote no on that, although the dictator would never propose such a bill because it would be stupid and it wouldn't work. And the dictator, another thing is the dictator would have to live in a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. And I believe this is, again, it's just another principle of frugality. It's another principle of limiting the dictator's ability to self-enrich themselves. A dictator who lives in a 2-bedroom house gets paid 10% less than the median income in the country. It is a dictator who is going to not self-enrich themselves and genuinely make decisions that are in the best interest of the people. That's just the truth, because they're not going to have any sort of self-interest, or they're not going to have any opportunities to enrich themselves. You could expand the audit to, capture their families as well, so they're not enriching themselves. I mean, that would be the burden of being dictator, and that's what I'm trying to build here in this democratic kind of dictatorial system, is where you get maximum participation and you get maximum efficiency and limited corruption. And the dictators are voted out after 10 years. The dictator selects 3 new people who he believes are of sufficient moral character. He or she believes are of sufficient moral character. Those 3 people are voted on by the people, and then the next dictator is in charge for the next decade. So you have a clear transition of power. You have a system that rewards competency, and a system that, hopefully would produce good results. I think this system could really work. It's a balance between democracy and dictatorship, because there are certain times when you need immediate responses. Like, for example, a pandemic, right? We're going through a pandemic right now. Who knows? Had we had a dictator, like, let's just be honest, China objectively has contained the virus. I'm not saying that what they did was moral in the way they contained it, nor am I saying we should follow that strategy, but I am saying there are certain instances where you need someone in charge to make the final decision. And the reason I know that people, they have a psychological issue with it, but when you really push back and you peel back the layers of this onion here, you realize that most people actually don't have a problem with a dictator as long as it's their dictator, right? So, for example, let's say you're a Christian or a Muslim. Would you have a problem with Jesus being dictator? Would you have a problem with Muhammad being a dictator? Of course you wouldn't. You would say, no, well, of course I would want them to be dictator. So they have no problem with dictators in principle. It's just as long as it meets their certain criteria. So really, people are fine with the dictator 99% of the time as long as it's their dictator. It's just the principle of picking a dictator and limiting the moral decay of their character so they can effectively make decisions. Like, it's kind of like the Chinese system, but there's no president for life, and the people do get a direct say. The people get to tell the dictator how they're feeling about every single issue, and then the dictator makes the final decision, balancing the future, the past, and the present. That would be the ideal system, I believe, of government. Now, what kind of character would you want your dictator to have? And this is an important point, because if your dictator is, a corrupt SOB, well, you're going to be in big trouble, right? If you get a dictator who's, more focused on, getting laid than actually running the country, you're going to have problems. So there'd be a couple of things that I believe, and these are not requirements. So we've already gone over what I believe the ideal system is: a balance between dictatorship and democracy, maximum transparency, efficiency, and limited powers on the dictator in terms of financially enriching themselves or their friends or their family. But what do I believe would be the moral character of the dictator? It would be someone who, I'm going to be honest, it would have to be an agnostic or a deist. I'm not saying it doesn't have to be, but generally people who are in a strict religion, like they're in a very, I am in this box, I am a Christian, I am a Muslim, I am a Jew, they tend to favor their group, and it kind of blinds them to the ability to empathize or consider the alternatives. So I think that someone who is a deist or an agnostic is more capable of, well, I don't really know what's going on, so I'll balance all the gods equally. Well, I'm a deist, so it could be any god, so I'll balance all the gods equally. I think an atheist would be too strict in terms of, you might get an atheist crackdown where it's like, we've got to get rid of religion. You never know. So I think a deist or an agnostic would be the ideal character. I'm not saying this is a requirement. I'm just spelling out, my ideal character that I believe would be necessary. So you'd have a deist or an agnostic. You'd also have someone who is not prejudice against any race, religion, or sexual orientation. And I think that's important because, again, if you look at history, if you get a dictator who favors their own group, you're going to have problems. I mean, imagine living in a country where the leader, specifically didn't like her group or favored some other group. That naturally causes conflict, division, and eventually, war in the end. So you'd have to have a dictator who's able to not favor their own group. Although they shouldn't, deliberately punish their own group in order to appear favorable, but they should just treat everyone equally, treat everyone as an equal. So those are the principles of a dictator that I think would produce, those are some of the principles. I mean, there's other ones such as, kindness, compassion, and intelligence. I believe intelligence is very important. You wouldn't necessarily want someone with like 190 IQ, freaky intelligent, but you'd want someone, 130, somewhere enough to where they're intelligent enough to actually lead effectively, but not so intelligent that they get lost in the woods, you know what I'm saying? Like they get lost in the idealism. So that would be the ideal system, I believe. It'd be a balance between democracy and dictatorship, certain limits on the dictator, certain necessary participations from the citizens, and I think that would produce the best results. I really believe this would produce the best and most effective results because you'd have a dictator who could move quickly in terms of, handling various severe issues, and as long as they use force sparingly. Also, whenever they use force, they have to upload a video that week explaining why they used force. Why did you use the military to shut down this crowd? Why did you do this? And the military commander would be voted on directly by the people every week. That would be another very important part because you need a military that is separate from the dictator's domain, because the dictator might just, all right, I'll take over the military and take over. I don't want to go after 10 years. You need a military leader who is elected by the people, similar to the accountant position. You elect 3 accountants, they audit the person's financial statement so that the people know if the dictator's trying to take over. Hey, why can't I vote for the military leader anymore? And the military leader and the accountants can't be fired by the dictator. It's another stipulation. But basically, this would limit, it builds a very tight framework that I believe could limit corruption and produce the most fruitful of results. Who knows, though? I mean, obviously, no system's perfect. No system's going to perfectly limit all the possibilities of corruption of the human mind, but I think this one does a pretty good job. I mean, you have this transparency through technology. I think I'm onto something there. Make sure to hit the subscribe button if you like this kind of video.